Okay, so this is how to solve quadratic word problems given the equation in vertex form. And this is an example that we've talked about in C part 1 of this segment on the CEO word problem for details on how we kind of set it up to begin with. But here's another question on that same situation. After how many days will the company's profit be $150,000? So if you want to pause the video and try that out. The first thing is they gave us a number, so we need to figure out whether to plug that in for X or Y. Well, it says that the company's profit will be $150,000, so we're looking for what represents profit, and we have in a previous video marked that Y stands for daily profit, so it makes it very easy for us to know that this is the value for Y. Now be careful because the Y is the profit in thousands of dollars, so it's very easy to miss this. So if the profit is $150,000, then Y is actually 150, not 150,000. So that's what we're going to plug in for Y in this equation. So moving this up so that you can see what's going on here. We're going to write this equation with 150 for Y. So 150 equals 1/18 times X minus 60 quantity squared minus 50. We now have a quadratic equation. We've talked about in a previous segment that you can solve a quadratic equation these 4 ways. And you can actually use any of the first 3 ways for this particular equation. But because we've already done complete the square on a previous one and factoring, I'm going to use the quadratic formula. So we're going to show you how to do this quadratic formula as requested. So step 1 for the quadratic formula is you want to simplify the equation to standard form, which is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So you need to simplify it and get it equal to 0, basically. Okay, so that's what you need. So I'm going to take this equation and put this up so we can see it. I'm going to rewrite it with the 1/18 in the front. X minus 60 has to be written twice so that I can multiply it out. So remember, as a refresher, that you can't just square X and 60 and take a shortcut because there's a minus sign. So if there's adding or subtracting inside the parentheses, you have to actually write X minus 60 twice and FOIL it. So I'm going to do that. X times X is X squared. X times negative 60 is negative 60X. Then I'm going to have negative 60 times X is another negative 60X, so that totals to negative 120X. Negative 60 times negative 60 is plus 3600. There's a 1/18 in front of the parentheses that needs to be distributed. So I'm going to do that. 1/18 X squared minus 120 divided by 18. So that's not going to go in evenly, I don't think. So let's try that. If I divide that by 3, that's going to be 6. And you can do this on a calculator. I just don't have one handy here, so that looks like it's 40 over 6, which reduces to 20 over 3. So that reduces to 3. That reduces to 20. And then I have to take 1/18 of 3600, which does reduce to 200. And then don't forget the minus 50. So I'm going to combine these. That becomes plus 150 together. 200 minus 50 is 150. And don't forget that this whole equation equals 150. So I need this to equal 0, so I'm going to subtract 150 from both sides. And it's going to be 1/18 X squared minus 20 over 3X. There should have been an X there, equals 0. Okay. Now, I'm going to get rid of the fractions because it would be a pain to plug in 1/18 into the quadratic formula, although I could do it. So I'm going to multiply everything by 18 to get rid of these denominators. So that means I'm going to distribute 18 to every term. So there's going to be an 18 here, an 18 here, and an 18 here. 18 times 1/18 cancels out to x squared. 18 and 3 cancel out. 6 times 20 is 120. Again, you can use a calculator for this. 18 times 0 is 0. Notice that if I wanted, I could factor out an x if I wanted to do it the factoring method. So if I wanted to do it by factoring, which we're not going to do, I could do x times x minus 120, and I could get the answer for this as well. Okay. I did, however, say I was using the quadratic formula. So step 2 of the quadratic formula is going to be labeling A, B, and C. So A is the coefficient of x squared, so that's going to be 1. B is the coefficient of x, so that's going to be negative 120. And C is the constant, and there is no constant, so that means that there's an invisible plus 0. Step 3 is to fill in the quadratic formula. And you should write it out first. So I'm going to do that. So you should write it as negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So in this case, b is negative 120. So the opposite of negative 120, or negative 120, is going to be positive 120. B squared, so negative 120 squared, that's going to be squaring the negative sign 2, minus 4ac all over 2a. So you're going to subtract 0 here. Negative 120 squared is going to become positive 120 squared, because negative times negative is positive. And you can do that on a calculator, but I'm just going to actually just know that I'm subtracting 0 here, so that's going to be 120 squared, because the negative is going to times negative is positive, so that's going to get rid of itself, and that's going to cancel out the with the square root and the square. So it's going to be 120 plus 120 over 2, and 120 minus 120 over 2. So 120 plus 120 is 240 over 2, and 120 minus 120 is 0 over 2. 240 divided by 2 is 120, 0 divided by 2 is 0. So my two answers is 120 and 0. Well, if I go back to my original question, it was, after how many days will a company's profit be $150,000? So it looks like it's going to be 0 days, after 0 days, and after 120 days, because it happens twice. The profit is $150,000 after 0 days and 120 days. All right.